A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Welcome to another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards. I'm glad that you've joined me on the program today. Stephen Gutowski of the Washington Free Beacon going to join us here in just a moment or two, talking about the latest with the big tech crackdown on the First Amendment rights of Second Amendment activists. We saw the deplatforming, at least on Facebook, of the Virginia Citizens Defense League earlier this week. This comes as Keybase, which is a encrypted chat and file sharing platform owned by the video conferencing company Zoom, has quietly changed their terms of service to prevent or prohibit the transferring of files dealing with 3D printed firearms. And then, of course, you can go back a couple of weeks ago. We talked with Pete Brownell, who's the owner of AR15.com, about GoDaddy's decision to abruptly quit serving as ARF.com's registrar. Again, we have seen these efforts on the part of big tech companies to silence the voices of Second Amendment advocates, or at least to push those voices out of the public square and into the sort of back alleys of the internet, where not many people can hear what those folks have to say. So we sat down and spoke with Stephen Gutowski of the Washington Free Beacon about this problem and how the Second Amendment community might respond. Take a look and a listen. Mr. Gutowski, thank you, sir, for coming on the program. It's good talking with you today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So we are seeing big tech crackdowns all over the place when it comes to the Second Amendment. Let's start with the Virginia Citizens Defense League. Facebook's been flirting with removing the organization, from the platform over the past couple of weeks. And now it's official. You've confirmed with Facebook a permanent ban for the VCDL.
Yes, that's right. Although, of course, they said that President Philip Van Cleve's ban was permanent back a week ago, and then reinstated him and then banned him again. So they're kind of all over the place. But yeah, they said that the decision to remove VCDL's Facebook page was correctly decided and that they won't be republishing.
And that's all that they said, right? I mean, you talked with Philip Van Cleve. It sounds like Facebook didn't even tell Van Cleve what specific post violated Facebook's supposed policies.
Not for the page, no, and Facebook wouldn't tell me either. They told me that Van Cleve initially, a couple of weeks ago, had violated their policy on advocating harm, but they wouldn't say how he did that. In fact, they specifically told me that they can't explain how or offer any evidence, because if they did that, it would there's a risk that bad actors could manipulate the system if they understood it, basically.
I have to say, I find that to be somewhat of an absurd explanation here. We can't tell you what the rules are because then people might figure out how to go around the rules. So it's better that nobody knows what the rules are and nobody can be assured that they're actually coloring inside the lines. I mean, again, Facebook is a private company and they are free to make these decisions. But how on earth can anybody operate on that platform in good faith when they don't know what is allowed and what is not allowed?
Yeah, I think that's the key issue here, right? Is that the moderation policies at Facebook are so opaque and oftentimes contradictory. I mean, this going back and forth here with VCDL. I mean, initially they took down the Facebook page for the group, but then said that was an error. They told me that was an error, and they apologized. And then a week later, now they've taken them down again without explanation as to what they did wrong. Like, it'd be one thing if Facebook would offer some sort of explanation for what they're doing. I think most people understand that Facebook doesn't want, violence threats on its platform or people to organize, something like the Capitol riot on its platform. You can understand why they wouldn't want that. But the problem is there's no evidence that VCDL was doing anything like that. And they deny that they're doing anything remotely like that. And you and I have followed them for years. They're a mainstream organization, one of the major players in Virginia politics, and have been for decades. They're not some sort of fringe militia group at all. And as far as I'm aware, they've never posted any sort of threats or tried to organize any sort of violence whatsoever. And in fact, they just had their lobby day, which a lot of people wanted them to cancel over, concerns surrounding the Capitol riots. But, they decided to go forward because they don't feel, Van Cleef told me they don't feel like they should cancel their event every time there's some outsider could potentially cause problems, or else they'd have to cancel all their events. That's his point of view on it. And to his credit, it went off without a hitch. There was no issues with their lobby day. A very similar thing happened last year with their lobby day, where they had, the massive protests where there were a lot of warnings of potential violence from outsiders, and then it didn't manifest, and everything was peaceful and frankly successful. They're a very influential group. They are probably the main reason why the assault weapons ban didn't pass in Virginia. So this isn't some fringe group that's out there speaking, in extremist language or organizing violence. It's just
no, it's not. I mean, and so I was one of the lobby day speakers this year. We streamed our speeches rather than doing them in person. But I haven't kept track of every post from the VCDL or Philip Van Cleef's personal Facebook page, but I can say that the communications that I saw from the VCDL, both to its members and then to the general public, were not extolling violence. They were not advocating violence. As a matter of fact, quite the opposite. The VCDL was explaining to members, look, this is what the laws are right now in Richmond, Virginia. And so here are the things that you can legally do. Here's what this lobby day rally and mobile rally is all about. And there was no call to violence. There was no acceptance of violence that I saw. As you say, again, we don't know what Facebook apparently saw that bothered them so much. But again, with the lack of information, the lack of transparency on the part of Facebook, I guess we'll never know. But this is not happening in a vacuum, Stephen. I reported last night Keybase, which is owned by Zoom, very quietly changed their terms of services. They're not allowing 3D firearm files to be distributed among their members anymore. AR15.com had their DNS registry yanked by GoDaddy a few weeks ago. How concerned are you that we are seeing, and this isn't just happening within the world of the Second Amendment, but how concerned are you that we are seeing a crackdown on disfavored speech from a lot of these tech giants, and the Second Amendment community is caught up in that crackdown?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think everyone has reason to be concerned about how far these policies go and what the limiting principle is, and especially the transparency in these actions. If you can just be banned for no reason with no explanation or any opportunity to, correct a mistake or whatever it may be, that's a problem. And it does seem certainly that gun enthusiasts are being targeted, and gun rights activists are being targeted around these suspensions. Like, it's not new, right? I mean, we've seen Facebook and Amazon went after the Firearms Policy Coalition for their repository of 3D gun files, which they did as put up as a explicitly political protest, and Facebook banned the sharing of the link on their website. Amazon banned, hosting of this website from their servers. And that happened several years ago. It's not a new thing, but it continues to be concerning, and it continues to, it seems, spread further beyond these, gray areas or whatever, more controversial areas like 3D printed guns. It's spreading now to just having a gun rights group, I guess. In the case of VCDL, they don't. Facebook is not forthcoming at all on what it is that the group did wrong.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to know. Like, is it just, are they just going to do this with every gun rights group now? Are they all at risk of being kicked off of Facebook? Maybe.
I mean, I don't know. I think you have to assume that that's the case, that they're at least at risk of being kicked off of Facebook at this point. And, look, I mean, I know that VCDL has migrated over to, I believe, MeWe, right, is the platform that they're now primarily using. ARF.com, they used a independent DNS registrar to fix their problem. The folks from Keybase have migrated in many cases to their own privately run servers. This doesn't stop this speech, but what it does do is it limits the ability for these groups to get their message out. Because, look, I mean, the number of users on MeWe is a tiny fraction of the number of users on Facebook. So folks who are scrolling through Facebook, they're still going to get commentary and posts from Moms Demand Action, from Everytown for Gun Safety. But they're, I worry that they're not going to get the other side. That, VCDL is banned. Maybe they'll go after FPC. Maybe they'll go after GOA or NRA. But eventually narrowing the content on the platform so that pro-Second Amendment points of view simply aren't seen and they're simply not heard. Whether or not there's a formal rule that allows those organizations to simply exist on the platform.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest problem here is just a total lack of transparency as to what it is that VCDL is supposed to have done wrong. It'd be one thing if they had some example of maybe there's comments left by people that Facebook didn't like. We don't know because they won't tell us. And how is anyone supposed to operate a Facebook page, which again, Facebook's the largest social media company in the world. And, they can do what they like with their platform, but they ought to be open and transparent about it. If they don't want gun groups on there, they should say that and let people know that they're not welcome anymore. This issue of having moderation policies and then being completely opaque about how they work is just so much worse than if they simply said, we don't believe in that gun rights, organizations should be able to have a platform on our service. They're welcome to do that if that's what they want to do, but or even go broader if they want. If they don't want conservatives to be there, they should say that. If they're trying to say that they're sticking to policies about promoting violence or harm, like that's not allowed, I think most people would agree with that. But if you're until you get to the point where you're using it in a way that's completely beyond transparency, and they just make accusations and never follow them up with any sort of evidence whatsoever because this fear of people gaming the system. I mean, yeah, maybe people could game the system if they understood it, I guess. But if people don't understand how the system works, then how can they abide by it too? Like just doesn't make any sense.
Well, exactly. I mean, and that's why ultimately I don't buy Facebook's excuse, because we already know that people are trying to game the system on Facebook. They're trying to do everything from enable child trafficking to drug sales to illegal sales of firearms. We know that that's taking place. With the opaque rules in place, it seems to me that if the bad actors are not being stopped, but the good actors are being stopped, that there's a problem here that needs to be resolved. Unfortunately, again, we get into the debate over the power of big tech and the footprint of big tech, and do we need to use the power of big government to curtail the power of big tech? And there are folks who say, well, if you removed Section 230 protections, that things like this would actually become more commonplace. I don't know what the answer is. I suspect there is no easy answer here. I suspect that what's really going on is a a fundamental shift in the attitudes among those in Silicon Valley, where a decade ago, Google said, don't be evil. And the ethos of the tech industry was one of freedom, was sort of a libertarian ethos, right? Where, we'll make our own rules, but this is the internet should be a free speech zone. I think that mindset is very different today. And I think that these organizations and platforms have become so big that now the ethos is much more about collecting the data from the users, monetizing that data, than it is ensuring that users can speak their mind, even if it makes folks uncomfortable, even if what they have to say is upsetting to some folks.
Sure. I mean, for me, I think that even if you don't believe that, you think reforming Section 230 is not a good idea for a number of reasons, including the one you just mentioned, even in that situation, even if you think Facebook should be able to do what it wants with its platform, I think that there's perfectly legitimate criticism to be had of how they're enforcing their own rules, right? Like, it's not helpful to anyone for them to be so completely disingenuous about what's going on, and just stonewall anyone who is trying to figure out why something happened, especially when it's a significant thing. This VCDL, they're not the NRA, they're not a national group, but they are a very prominent and influential group in Virginia politics, and Facebook removing them from their platform has real world consequences that are going to be significant in how they can, influence the elected officials here in the state. I mean, that's mainly what they use their Facebook for, to organize their membership, to send, email campaigns supporting or opposing different gun bills in the legislature, to set up events like Lobby Day. There's reasons why it matters beyond just Facebook policy. These have real world consequences, mm-hmm. and perhaps people are not entitled to Facebook services or Amazon services or Zoom services or whatever, but you can't ignore completely what the consequences of removing people are. And it's fair to question whether or not the process that's used to remove them is reasonable or not, and is something that maybe people start to leave the platform over at the very least, and figuring out answers to how the social media sphere is regulated. That's perhaps a very controversial and there's a lot of different points of view on it. But I think everyone can agree that it's a problem if major companies like this are, with the kind of influence that they have, are being unfair or unclear in how they're even handling their own internal policies.
Absolutely. So last question, how do you think the Second Amendment community will respond? Obviously with VCDL, they've moved to another platform. Is that what do you think we're going to see? That, big tech playing whack-a-mole with these Second Amendment organizations? Facebook bans them. They pop up on MeWe. Maybe MeWe changes its terms of services and they've got to go to Telegraph or somewhere else. I mean, how do we continue to get our message out? How do groups like VCDL continue to get their message out to members if, these big tech companies don't want us to be talking, or at least they don't want us to be heard?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really hard question, right? I mean, I think you want to try and first make these companies understand that there's a significant difference between a group like VCDL and a fringe militia group or something like that, or a group that's
actually advocating violence. Yeah.
Yeah. Like there's a major difference between this group and some of the other groups that have seen, mass deplatforming. Their VCDL is not, a conspiracy group. They're not a group that advocates violence. They are a mainstream organization, I think, by any measure in Virginia politics. And it's important, I think, for these tech companies to understand that and for them to realize that they're increasingly alienating, more and more mainstream Americans with these sorts of moves. And as far as combating them, I mean, it is, to be totally honest, it's very difficult, right? Because while, the principle is that these are private companies which have, the ability to regulate their own platforms and who gets to use their services, they're extremely large at the same time. And they do really limit how much reach you can have if you're not on those platforms. And maybe if you're advocating for violence or organizing, insurrections, you shouldn't be on there. But I would hope that the number of people that these companies deem as unworthy of their services, they should try and keep that as small as possible. I mean, it's in their business interest, but I think it's also in the interest of the country to keep that group as small as possible, to reasonable extents here. It's just not something that you want the, tens of millions of people banned from these platforms. I mean, certainly another platform could pop up and, but you see the issues that causes with something like Parler, where, right. First of all, you get a lot of these alternate platforms have all of the rejects from the other platforms, and they don't create the greatest of communities to go over to. So they're not super appealing to people who aren't just already banned from other platforms. And then they can often have issues of oversight of themselves, where they just don't do much of any moderation. And that causes all kinds of other problems. And so it's hard to launch a new major social media platform. It's not impossible. It happens, right, continually. TikTok didn't exist a couple of years ago, and now it's massive. So hopefully maybe that natural process of capitalism will produce a better alternative to Facebook in the near future. Maybe the MeWe is going to be one of the answers that VCDL is picking as their new home, but it's not easy. It's certainly not. There's not a simple and easy answer. It's not as easy as just saying go create your own. There's a lot of other questions that come up that I think need to be dealt with.
Absolutely. Stephen Gutowski with the Washington Free Beacon. Always good talking with you, sir. Thanks so much for coming on the show today. My thanks to Stephen for joining us on the program. And, again, this is a problem that is bigger than just the Second Amendment community. I think this comes when problems like this pop up, when all of a sudden a dominant strain of thought is, look, half the country is the enemy. Half the country is not just deplorable or disagreeable, but half of the country are the enemy and have to be treated and dealt with in such a fashion. I think that is what we're seeing right now on the part of these big tech companies, aided and egged on by these voices on the left who want to try to treat anybody who didn't vote for Joe Biden as if they are a domestic terrorist. I believe that mindset will pass at some point. But while you're in this witch hunt, and again, go back 100 years, we saw this with the Red Scare during the Woodrow Wilson administration, saw this during McCarthyism in the 1950s when Joe McCarthy took what was a real issue, the communist infiltration of the federal government, and instead started talking about how, General George Marshall was part of the commie plot. Those types of things do die down. They are not a permanent feature of American society. But while we are living in that moment, the threats to our civil liberties, the threats to our freedom of speech, the threat to the right to dissent, which I believe is one of the most fundamental freedoms that we as human beings possess, along with our ability to defend and protect ourselves, the right to dissent and to disagree is one of the most fundamental rights that we possess. And I just see big tech trying to enforce a narrower and narrower and narrower conformity of thought and opinion that can be shared. And if you color outside of those lines, even if you don't know that you're coloring outside of those lines, that's when you get the axe. All right, let's turn our attention to today's armed citizen story, our good deed of the day, our recidivist report as well. We'll start there with a case out of Muncie, Indiana. Take a look at this headline. Man already facing 22 charges held on meth and gun counts. Yeah, how about that? The Muncie Star Press says 31-year-old Dustin Brock Smith arrested on Saturday when Muncie police were sent to the former Hilltop Motel after dispatchers received a report about a man with a gun there. A woman told officers that Smith had come to her RV that was parked on the property and pointed, quote, the biggest gun I ever seen at her face, accusing her of, quote, stealing his dope. Yeah, woman had a police scanner. When Smith heard that officers were on their way, he and a female companion fled. They were pulled over a short time later. Police canine indicated that there were controlled substances in the SUV. Officers reported finding meth and plastic bags in the vehicle, along with, quote, a large amount of money. They believe that Smith at the time was, quote, under the influence of an unknown substance, perhaps even meth, then taken to a local hospital for a blood draw, taken then to the Delaware County Jail in Indiana, where at last report he is held on $17,500 bond. So in addition to dealing with methamphetamine, Smith is charged with pointing a firearm, possession of meth, possession of paraphernalia. He already is, as I mentioned, facing 22 charges in 8 different cases in Indiana, causing serious bodily injury while driving while intoxicated, criminal recklessness, driving while intoxicated, possession of marijuana, possession of a narcotic drug, possession of paraphernalia, 2 counts of driving without ever receiving a license, possession of meth, resisting law enforcement, 3 counts of unlawful possession of a syringe, 5 counts of driving while suspended. He's also apparently been convicted in the past of 3 counts of check fraud, conversion, driving while under a suspended license, 4 different occasions for that, possession of marijuana, receiving stolen property, reckless driving, resisting law enforcement twice, robbery, and theft. So, given the lengthy criminal history of this 31-year-old, I'm kind of surprised that I don't see a charge of felon in possession for Dustin Smith. Instead, just pointing a firearm. That seems to be the one gun-related charge. So maybe this was a misdemeanor robbery charge, but you would think with the lengthy criminal history and the current charges that he's facing, Mr. Smith might be facing more serious criminal charges in this most recent incident, but that does not appear to be the case, and I'm guessing that Justin Smith probably going to be out back on the streets before long. Our armed citizen story of the day from the Pacific Northwest, rather generic headline here from KXL in the Pacific Northwest, Bellingham, Washington. A sporting goods employee who was in fear of his life shot a robbery suspect in the chest after that suspect tried to use a hammer to smash glass and steal firearms. Officers said the suspect was warned several times to stop when an employee pulled out his legally concealed firearm, shot the suspect once. When police arrived, they found the suspect lying on the floor of that sporting goods store in Bellingham, Washington, with a gunshot wound to the chest. He was taken to Harborview Medical Center in Seattle for treatment. The employee not injured during the robbery. No report of the current condition of the suspect, but if he does survive his injuries, he will obviously be facing robbery charges once he is released from the hospital. And finally today, our good deed of the day, also from Washington State, Olympia, Washington, where a Department of Natural Resources police officer helped to save a hypothermic man lost in the snow in Olympic National Forest over the weekend. The 54-year-old man driving in deep snow on a road that's shared by the DNR and the Forest Service when his vehicle became stuck. So at some point, he decided, well, crap, I'm not getting out of here in my car, so I might as well try to get out of here on foot. Nobody was able to contact him. He started walking. Mason County first responders reached out to DNR officer Neil Schuster for assistance in their search and rescue operation around noon on Saturday. So this is the day after this guy had disappeared. Schuster got his ATV and then met sheriff's deputies and firefighters along the Forest Service Road. Local first responders were unable to reach the man. The road was impassable even with four-wheel drive SUVs with tire chains on. So Schuster unloaded his ATV, took a firefighter as his passenger to where they believe the guy was located. After traveling to about 3 miles of deep snow, Schuster and the firefighter found the man along the edge of the road, soaking wet, wearing only a sweatshirt, sweatpants, and a single shoe. Suffering from frostbite, severe hypothermia, he was disoriented, he was unable to communicate. According to the officers, he had a blank stare. He was so weak that Schuster and the firefighter actually had to load him onto the ATV before they transported him to medics below. They were able to take him to a local hospital. And at last report, it looks like this man is actually going to recover. So an unbelievable job by Neil Schuster, DNR officer in Washington State, in the right place at the right time, willing and able to do the right thing to save that man's life. We thank you, sir, for your very, very good deed. That is all the time we've got for you on this edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company. I want to thank you for being a part of the program as always, at least until we get deplatformed ourselves, I suppose. Until that point comes, though, don't forget, you can find us, Town Hall Media, on YouTube. You can also find us on Rumble. I don't think we're going anywhere on Rumble. Just look for Bearing Arms Cam & Company. If you like the podcast version, you can still find us, for now anyway, on Amazon Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher. And thank you again for all of your support. We'll be back tomorrow with more of the latest Second Amendment news and information. Until then, be well, be safe, and be free.